Well, I was waiting for the musical cue, and I don't hear a musical cue or commercials following. I don't know, strange stuff. Good morning, everybody. This is Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell. That is the 23rd day of March. I should say June, if you've been enjoying the weather as I have lately. Oh, good gracious, so many things to catch up on. The 48-hour warning for the end of the world has now been postponed to 5 days warning for the end of the world. Saturday night, President Trump issued on Truth Social probably what most of you are aware of, but for those of you who aren't, especially those of you who are addicted to Fox, which I understand the numbers are decreasing. President Trump issued this at 5:45 p.m. Mountain Time Saturday night. If Iran doesn't fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Now, Iran's largest power plant, the gas-powered Damavand plant, is located near Pakdasht in southeast Tehran. It's just southeast of Tehran. Their other major facilities include the Shahid Abbaspor, Karan 3, Masjid Soliman hydroelectric dams in the southwestern Khuzestan region, as well as the Kerman thermal plant in the southeastern Kerman region. Now remember, most of Iran is mountainous. Because most of Iran is mountainous, they have a lot of snow. Because they have a lot of snow, they have a lot of melt, unlike Utah this year. And because of that, they have large reservoirs that drive large hydroelectric power dams. Sometimes they get this idea that Iran is just a big open desert, like the land between Nevada and Utah. No, it isn't. It's very mountainous. And remember, Iran is as big as Western Europe. You take Germany, France, Spain, and all the stuff in between them, that's how big Iran is. Huge. And they have all kinds of power sources. But the largest one is run by gas. It's not nuclear. And that's what President Trump was saying he would attack if they didn't open. If they didn't open the reservoir, or didn't open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran's sole nuclear power plant is Bushehr in the Persian Gulf Coast. And the IAEA said earlier this week that a projectile struck a structure about 350 meters from the facility. Israel's military denied the attack, but a missile came within 350 meters of the nuclear facility. That would be beyond. That would be something beyond an international war crime. Now, Iran responded with defiance, as they told Press TV, if Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure is attacked by the enemy, all energy and infrastructure, as well as information technology and water desalination facilities belonging to the U.S. and the regime in the region will be targeted pursuant to previous warnings. So only hours before Trump's ultimatum, Axios had already reported, quote, after 3 weeks of war, the Trump administration has begun initial discussions on the next phase and what peace talks with Iran might look like, according to a U.S. official and a source with knowledge. Egypt and Qatar have informed the U.S. and Israel that Iran is interested in negotiating. Some take Trump's ultimatum as in contradiction to his administration beginning initial discussions, but such peace overtures have been more indicative of surprise attacks than any realization of a need for peace. Quote, end quote. Yeah, the surprise attacks during peace negotiations. Twice now, when Iran has sat down with representatives of the Epstein regime to establish some kind of peace, they have been attacked in the midst of the negotiations. So there's not going to be a third negotiation. And while you see the threat to take out Iran's power infrastructure that was due by 5:45 p.m. this afternoon, now being extended 5 days because of constructive or productive talks. Who are they kidding? That's not why. That's not why at all, because Iran is not talking with the Epstein regime. They're not. They're talking. Their talk consists of launching missiles and drones, which are getting much more sophisticated, and the big bad ones are finally coming out. And if you've seen any of the leaked video of Tel Aviv, holy smoke. Holy smoke. Not just the destruction, but the vast mass of human lives trying to get on the boats at the Haifa harbor and Tel Aviv harbors, trying to get out of Israel as fast as possible. So who does the Epstein regime think they're kidding when they say because of constructive talks? The talking is done. Iran's already made it clear. They've already made it very clear what's going to happen. Complete demilitarization of that entire Middle East area by America and by Israel. America is to withdraw all their armed forces, air, sea, and navy, air, sea, and land, out of the entire area, to abandon all of their forts, all their fortresses, all their bases, all their ports, and get the hell out of the Middle East. Then reparations are to be paid to Iran for what Iran has lost in this unprovoked attack. Other than that, shut up. We have nothing to say. So when you see the U.S. answer, or not the answer, but their explanation as to why President Trump is not going to go through with his Armageddon threat, you have to consider the fact that either he was threatened with the 25th Amendment, or somebody's finally got to the man to help him to understand the absolute foolishness of such an act on the part of the American military, when it is obvious Iran has control of the Israeli skies. Israeli Air Force, American Air Force cannot stop the continual rain of missiles pounding Tel Aviv and selected other areas, which is leading to the point where people are predicting a false flag, either the bombing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, or something else to further provoke a united effort by the Arab nations against Iran. Well, the Arab nations have enough problems of their own right now, because their own dictatorial fascist government, well, not even fascist, just plain dictatorship governments, of which, for example, Bahrain, the latest numbers I saw was 80 to 85% of the population of Bahrain wants the emir out of there. They don't want this kind of government any longer, a dictatorial government. Almost all of the Arab states have dictatorial governments over their people, who stay there and fatten themselves on all the oil they're selling to the West, which now has come to a halt through the Persian Gulf, except the oil is going to China. And it's not just if the ship is going to China, it can get through. It's that the oil that's going to China was paid for by the yuan, the Chinese currency, not the petrodollar. Now, when Iran has that kind of control, when you hear the Epstein regime saying, oh, we're having very productive talks, so we're going to back off on destroying their country. Iran, of course, said, well, if that's what you want to do, you've got the wherewithal to do it, but we want you to know what we're going to do. We will take out every last power plant, every last desalination plant that you guys have in the entire Arabian world. And come what may, we will lay waste, utter waste, to the Arab puppets, the Arabian puppets of the Epstein regime. Now we know, as printed by British press many times, when the Saudi delegation would go to London, they would kind of forget their Islamic rules of lifestyle and divulge themselves of all of the extracurricular activities that the British have to offer, complete with films, pictures, photographs, so that they have learned from the Mossad. How do you control the leadership of another country? Well, you take pictures of them in compromising positions. It's simple, it's easy. And you threaten to hurt them economically. Now, this proposal from Oman's foreign minister for a regional security and development architecture may have had a precursor last June, when the negotiations were also being mediated and pursued prior to that little bolt out of the sky by the U.S.-Israeli bombing of Iran's nuclear sites with B-2s and 30,000-pound bombs. Can you imagine that, a 15-ton bomb? Well, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists last June 2, before this happened, published a regional nuclear consortium in the Persian Gulf. Now, it was a precursor to what Oman is suggesting now. And these people are, it's like the same thing in Ukraine, where the Western states still think they can sit down and negotiate with Russia over land swaps in order to get a ceasefire, when Russia has already made it. There is a commercial playing at K-Talk. The commercials are back up again. And I'm glad to see that. American Appliance. I heard their commercial there at the top of the hour. For those of you on the stream, I'll continue here. But the attempts to end the endless war between Israel and Iran that they were putting together last June, before, in the midst of the discussions, of course, the United States started bombing Iran while their own people were there in serious discussion meetings. Gee whiz. So when you start counting up President Trump's worst mistakes, what do you put there at the top? When he was running for office 2 years ago, no more wars, and I'll end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours with a phone call. You know, I voted for him on that basis. I thought he really was committed to peace. And then when I saw the increasing numbers of money into his reelection campaign that was coming from Israel First type of personalities, including many billionaires inside of America, then it began to be obvious who he was working for and what of particular nature his promises would actually be fulfilled and which ones would be forgotten. So what I thought was going to be the end of the world this afternoon looks like it may go till Friday or Saturday, because of the constructive, productive talks that are going on. The truth is, the Western Alliance, the Epstein regime, is looking for an off-ramp. They're looking for a way to get out of this. I saw a great analogy, a sports analogy, on somebody's um, uh, text the other day. I think it was on X, and it was to the effect: it's like, you know, a somewhat reasonably talented basketball team is playing Duke for the national championship. Let's say Kentucky. Kentucky's playing Duke for the national championship in basketball. And halfway through the game, it's obvious that Duke is just taking Kentucky apart. And somewhere in the middle of the game, when Duke has a 40-point lead over Kentucky, Kentucky grabs the ball, walks off the court, declares victory, and goes home. I thought that was really good, because I can see that in so many voices in the West now. Well, anyway, let me get back to this now that I've got K-Talk back on here. Iran has allowed certain ships through the Strait of Hormuz, including from India and Pakistan. And as these ships are guided via a route that's very close to the Iranian side of the strait, it's also reported that Iran means to use its control over the strait to preferentially support those who do not support the assault against them. And it's reported further that it may target, as I was talking about there before the break, the American dollar. Because the only ones getting through right now are the Chinese, and they're paying for the oil with yuan. Now, CNN reported, I guess it was probably a week ago, that Tehran is in discussions with 8 countries. I'm quoting now from CNN. Tehran is in discussions with 8 countries outside the Middle East to grant safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz to tankers carrying oil traded in Chinese yuan. Now, the increasing weaponization of the dollar that is going on, given its use as the reserve currency, has given second thoughts to a lot of these countries about ending their dependence on our dollar. So Iran may well be targeting this kind of a vulnerability against the United States, not just with missiles. So Iran, which is a new member of BRICS, has advocated for the new currency for international trade. However, the same CNN source indicated that traffic through the strait may be managed upon other considerations as well. South Korea's the Chosun Daily quoted Harrison Pratt, who's deputy director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, saying this route usage linked Iran's approval of specific ships' passage through the strait. They have activated a Hormuz control system. This situation has created a strait control system dependent on political agreements with Iran. Well, that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. You're not our friend, you're not going through here. Even if you are Shia, but you have American bases in your country, you're not going through here till you close down those bases and get every last vestige of American military, British military, whatever, Western military power out of your country. Then we'll talk about you getting through the strait. I heard on the news this morning that the American military is getting ready to pound the missile sites along the eastern border of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, some of those cliffs are 2,000 and 3,000 feet above the ground level, above the sea level, and hidden in all those crags and crannies in that rock development are missile sites hidden back in the rock. This is why Lloyd's of London will not insure the ships going through the strait. It actually, those little power boats act even smaller than that. The little drone-driven boats that cover that area like mosquitoes around a campfire. Any one of those is capable with one explosion of crippling or even sinking an oil tanker. So I don't know who got the President Trump or who got his attention, or maybe he's finally listening to his highest military commanders who warned him, don't start this war. Back before February 28th, he was told, don't do it. But of course, it's not up to President Trump whether he's going to do it or not. It's up to his controllers, which is why when I hear discussion of the 25th Amendment, and there are those who are seriously questioning President Trump's mental acuity, it won't make any difference if you get rid of President Trump because President Trump isn't in control. The Epstein class, the Epstein regime is what's in control. And it's made up largely of Israel First Zionists. So even if they got rid of Trump and then Vance goes in as the new president, it's going to be the same policies. So, it's kind of silly to talk about the 25th Amendment for that reason alone. And what they need to be doing is getting the correct information to President Trump, which is getting to be harder and harder now because of the traitor Tulsi Gabbard and what she's done. Now, Alistair Crook said back on March 19th, a mere 4 days ago, he said this: Pakistan has been able to negotiate the passage of its cargo through Hormuz in just such a fashion by proving that the cargo was purchased in yuan. At issue, therefore, is not just the U.S. military presence in the region, which Iran insists must be expelled, but rather Iranians calling for the ending altogether of the region's dollar trading. Then and they know this, they go for America's pocketbook. Save some missiles. The old idea that the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, economics can be much more powerful than bombs. Go after America economically. Tell these people, yeah, okay, we won't sink your boat. We won't sink your boat going through the strait, carrying oil to wherever it goes, if you can prove to us that oil was paid for with a yuan and not American dollars. Now, Ben Norton cited from Al Jazeera an Iranian IRGC spokesperson saying they will not allow a liter of oil to pass until the U.S. and Israel stop. And you will not be able to artificially lower the price of oil. Expect oil at $200 a barrel. And of course, so far, oil has gone around $60 a barrel in January to over $120 now. And the spokesperson said, the price of oil depends on regional security, and you are the main source of insecurity in that region. So weaponization of the dollar may have created a strategic liability, sort of going for a weak jugular vein, exposed for countries to use as a weapon against Washington. See, the Iranians aren't stupid. They know very well what they're doing. All right, I was going to talk about the coming credit crunch. Just a thought while K-Talk is on break, for those of you on the stream. This Seeking Alpha article, Seeking Alpha is a Substack, is interested, it was talking about writing off the private credit, writing off the debt. It leads with the UBS Bank analysis of a default rate in private credit heading from the current 7 to 8% to 15%, far above the comparable bank loans in 07 and 08 before the crash. And while the author admits that the private credit is only $2 trillion or so, he's linking it to mortgage-backed securities on commercial office space and to small business loans that have the 7 to 8% delinquency rates now. So the potential crunch trigger could be more than $8 trillion. And by credit crunch, let me define that. The author means the economic downturning point when banks cut the credit ratings and, more importantly, the credit limits of the large number of companies like J.P. Morgan Chase has just done for the private credit sector. But anyway, I want to say a few things here about Joe Kent before we go too much further into the program. Every now and then a hero emerges. It's easy to tell the heroes because it's so clear to see the anti-heroes. The heroes who used to be a hero, but now they're not heroes anymore. Remember a year ago, maybe more than a year ago, you were excited to see Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth and Bobby Kennedy Jr., at least he still held on to his integrity. And Patel, all marshaling in to somehow clean up the judicial mess, the security mess, the intelligence mess that the United States seemed to be suffering from, especially after the end of the Biden administration. And as these heroes emerged from behind the curtains onto the center stage, and now look at them. Look at Patel. Look at Bondi. Look at Gabbard. Look at Hegseth, who's talking about getting more money so they can kill more people. Holy smoke. So Joe Kent, and I'm not surprised Joe Kent resigned. Joe Kent, the recent director of the National Counterterrorism Center, who resigned over President Trump's unwarranted assault on Iran, he said, told the Washington Post yesterday that his public stand and resignation came from his experience as a special forces soldier in Iraq. He promised himself, quote, "If I ever have a seat at the table, I'm not going to put up with this. I'll do whatever I can to prevent it," end quote. He said that in his meeting with the other I was going to say Israel, but I'm thinking I should say Zionists. But the anti-Zionist pundits like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Sager and Jetty, Sean Ryan, to make a case to fellow conservatives about the war and defend his claims that Israel forced the president into launching Operation Epic Fury. Here is the fellow who was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And he said it was Israel who forced the president into launching Operation Epic Fury. Now, I don't get to see what the force was. What kind of force did Israel use to force the president? And then you saw some of those numbskull, lame excuses, especially by our Secretary of State and Director of National Security, saying things like, well, Israel was going to do it, and since they were going to do it anyway, we joined in with them. On March 19th, the Council on Foreign Relations hosted the London-born Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism, Sebastian Gorka, someone who needs to be thrown out of this country by his ear, to run a personal attack against Joe Kent. And he said this, "I cannot in good conscience support," this is what Kent said publicly, "I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation." Then he highlighted President Trump's record against these foreign wars, cited external pressure on him, called upon him to reverse his present course. Then the CFR brought in one individual who displayed some real imperial outrage and just ridiculous pettiness over Kent's action, Sebastian Gorka, who accused Kent of being a man without honor and an utter disgrace. Now, Gorka said that Kent mentioned his deceased wife in a letter in order to gain political leverage and complained that Kent used official stationery to make his official resignation. Do you know what happened to Joe Kent's wife? A terrorist bombing in Syria had killed his wife, and Kent alleged that the present actions against Iran will only create many more terrorists to kill American soldiers. Now, after all the name-calling from that bastard Gorka, he made no effort to disprove any of the charges that Kent made in his resignation letter. He did not refute Kent's statement that Iran was not an imminent threat, or that President Trump was manipulated by Israel and its lobbyists into starting the war, or that violating Trump's own America First campaign pledge, Gorka said that Kent did not act upon principles, but was most likely unaware of the immediate danger facing the country. Director of National Counterterrorism, and he wasn't aware of the imminent, immediate danger that Iran was presenting against America. See, the problem is there are people who will believe that screed, that crap, that vomit, without really investigating this. Gorka says only Trump and his inner circle could possibly know the danger that was facing this country. He argued that Kent was not in the room when the decision was made to start the war. Well, of course they're not going to have him in there, because he's going to talk against it. Like General Kane, who just before the attack, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, warned Trump, don't do it. Don't start this war. Well, we're now seeing that Kane might have known something that Trump didn't know. Well, the random origin and conduct of the assault on Iran, from what I can pick up from several different news sources, has simply demoralized our troops, who have trouble understanding why they are risking the danger of losing their lives for Israel. They're having a hard, if they were in danger of losing their lives for America, that would be different. But they're having a hard time understanding why they should be fired at, shot at, bombed at for Israel. So far, there's been at least 245 casualties, only 13 deaths admitted to, but if you've seen some of the videos, it's far beyond 13. So according to the HuffPost, quote, a military official who was treating service members evacuated from the Middle East to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, said troops are suffering from inadequate force protection and planning, and already reporting a severe destabilizing toll from Iranian ballistic missiles and drones that have been repeatedly striking American military facilities. A ground operation would be an absolute disaster. We don't have a plan for that. This is what the soldiers are saying. I don't know what the airmen and the Marines are saying, but this is what the soldiers are saying. We don't have a plan. We can't even fully defend a single land base in the theater. Yeah, every single land base has been hit by at least one missile. And what Iran was saying in response to President Trump's threat, you do that. You attack our electrical infrastructure, and there will be nothing left of you. So the Huffington Post interview found interviewing some of the U.S. troops who I hope we're talking under anonymity or they're going to be in serious trouble, said, troops are suffering from inadequate force protection and planning, reporting severe destabilizing toll from Iranian ballistic missiles and drones that have repeatedly been striking American facilities. A ground operation would be an absolute disaster. We don't have a plan for that. We can't even fully defend the land base in the theater. So Quoting some of the troops, they said, "We're caught up in the war with such vulnerability, overwhelming stress, frustration, and disillusionment to the degree that we may leave the military." Can you do that? Can you just report in sick and don't come back? And where does conscientious objection show up? Are you willing to go to Leavenworth for a few years as a conscientious objector? You know, I never was in the military. My father was, but I wasn't. Almost the first lottery against the draft back in the 60s or the early 70s. Shoot, I forget when it was. My birthday drew a very good number. I've told the story. I missed Vietnam by 16 minutes. However, what I'm talking about is when Pearl Harbor was attacked, the lines at the recruiting stations were blocks long. When 9/11 was attacked, it doesn't matter who you think attacked it, the effect was still the same. Recruiting centers lined up by people to go kick the Middle East butt for attacking and destroying the Trade Center. As I said, regardless of who really was at fault there, it doesn't matter. It's the effect that it had. And so here you have a completely different situation. You have these young men and women who signed up for the military for an education, for a career, to be able to end up with a 4-year degree in something or learn a trade over their 4 years they're going to be in there, in return for serving their country in a non-war situation. And the risk, of course, is that your country may go to war when you went in there for an education or a trade. That risk obviously is there all the time. But when you're going to war without Congress declaring the war, as is the constitutional provision, and you have an executive that says, "I don't follow international law, I follow my gut," then you might start having some conscious conflict. So a veteran and a reservist who mentors young officers said this: "I'm hearing out of service members' mouth the word, 'We are not going to die for Israel. We are not political pawns.'" Mike Prisner, the executive director of the Center for Consciousness in War, said his group has seen a 10-fold increase in contacts from troops. Many cite the strike on the girls' school in Manab, killing 170 girls aged 7 to 12 as their breaking point. I remember when I first heard about that, and I heard about it from what I considered some of the most responsible sources, that it was indeed an American Tomahawk missile that did it. And you can't go to Amazon and order an American Tomahawk missile. Only 3 countries are sold that Tomahawk. Yes, Israel's one of the 3. And then all of the videos that came out proving that Iran did it to themselves on purpose to gain public support. I wanted to vomit when I saw that stuff. And now, of course, the American military, the Pentagon, admits we did it. Which brings me to the Ford. Have you seen the pictures of the Ford at Diego Garcia? No. The Lincoln is over at Diego Garcia. The Ford, I think, is at Cyprus. The back end of that aircraft carrier The huge missing pieces of metal on the back end of that aircraft carrier, a laundry fire. You know, it's like when 9/11 and the towers were attacked, and the apologists and the Zionists and the rest of the lying spew said the heat of the fire melted the steel, and that's what collapsed the building. You know, it's like the heat of the laundry fire. It must have been a pretty big, it must be a big laundry. The laundry fire. Sorry, there's another commercial at K-Talk. The laundry fire must have been huge because there were several places on. Hey, listen, I'm not laughing at the seamen who must have been killed in that attack. And it's not funny. What's funny to me is the lying, the constant lying that goes on. No wonder Joe can't quit. I can only hope that there are some men and women who have a sense of self to the point they know this is wrong. I've talked to my sons, grandsons that are capable of being drafted, granddaughters that are capable of being drafted. I hope they're a part of the hell no, we won't go crowd. All right, a little bit more about the Ford. Of course, the known cause for the fire on board that has sent the naval carrier USS Gerald Ford out of action and into port for repairs. The Telegraph, Friday, I think it was, wrote that while problems with the laundry facilities and toilets may be suspect, maybe suspect, the thing says, there are also reports that sabotage may have been involved, not by Iranian undercover operatives, on an American aircraft carrier, but by crew members disgruntled that their standard 6-month tour of duty has now been extended to the Gulf operation. And to make matters worse, the ship's toilets have been constantly breaking down and clogging up with sewage. The problems show that despite Trump's boasting, the mighty U.S. fleet is vulnerable to the same humdrum glitches as Britain's, much of which is stuck in docks being repaired. Trump's opponents, meanwhile, claim it speaks to a wider malaise. So the Navy Secretary, John Phelan, and Deputy Secretary Wahung Kao met behind closed doors with military families Thursday evening in Hampton, Virginia. Quote, recognize all that comes with deployment extensions and combat operations placed on families. They would like to take this opportunity to express their appreciation. Well, if that wasn't enough, Iran is making waves with the attempted strike on the UK's Diego Garcia, although Iran said the two missiles that were fired at Diego Garcia did not come from them. But it's reported that they did it. And of course, the strike on the Diego Garcia naval base may have failed, but it nonetheless is making waves due to the fact that nobody knew that Iran had the capability to shoot anything that far away. Nobody, and I mean nobody, even guessed that Iran had missiles with that range, said William Alberk, a Europe-based senior fellow at the Pacific Forum, telling Bloomberg in an interview, quote, it means they probably used a modified missile, maybe a prototype, indicating that Tehran still had storage or workshops that could make alterations. Alberk added that Iran could have removed weight from an existing missile. or even taken off the warhead to extend its range. Or it could have been a one-off modified design. Now, if you've seen these videos on X or Instagram or YouTube that I've seen of Iranian missiles taking off, you know how you can tell the difference between a conventional missile and a hypersonic? If you can see, the base of that missile, where the thrust emerges from the very bottom of the missile, if the thrust takes up the whole space and it's just this big fiery plume blowing out behind the missile, that's a conventional missile. Now, it may have novelistic motions as it comes back down into the atmosphere, trying to evade surface-to-air counter missiles. But when you see a hypersonic one, and there's plenty of views, when you look at that thrust plate, if you look at the bottom of that missile, there's a small hole which all that thrust is coming out of. In fact, most of the bottom of that missile is enclosed. And there's a little hole in the middle of it. That's just simply, if you're watering your grass and you're holding a hose in your hand and you put your thumb down over the water coming out of the end of the hose, what happens? It sprays out faster and further. And that's one of the ways in which they take a conventional thrust engine and convert it to a hyper. Usually it's solid fuel, but they make the thrust exhaust much smaller to create greater pressure. And because of the equal and opposite reaction, the thing is going to move much faster. And then even at that point, it doesn't really achieve the super hypersonic velocities that it can, up to 10 to 15 times the speed of sound, until it starts back down into the atmosphere. I don't know why I said that. I just thought you might find that interesting. Now, anyway, in a statement on March 21st, which avoided any mention of an attack on Diego Garcia, the UK Defense Ministry said, and remember, the base there is not just American, it's UK as well, and I think there's some other NATO outfits. But the UK's Defense Ministry said, Iran's reckless attacks lashing out across the region and holding hostage the Strait of Hormuz are a threat to British interests and British allies. Well, what else would you expect him to say, for Pete's sake? Iran's Foreign Minister Agrachi spoke with the British Foreign Secretary, strongly condemning the UK's decision to allow the US to utilize its military bases. These actions will certainly be regarded as participation in aggression and will be recorded in the history of relations between our two. Well, just what a bunch of crap. I don't even want to finish the quote. So, was the announcement of Iran's attack on Diego Garcia not true? Because a senior Iranian official told Al Jazeera they did not fire on the UK's Diego Garcia naval base. Now, why would they lie about that if it's not true? There's no reason to lie about that. Because if they did do it, they'll take credit for it, like they'll take credit for every other thing that they've bombed in the Arabian Peninsula, on both sides of the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, the Red Sea, Israel, Cyprus, even a French military base. They gladly accepted responsibility for it. If they fired these missiles at Diego Garcia, they would take it. They would take credit. So up till now, it was not thought possible that Iran could fire a missile over 1,200 miles. Diego Garcia is twice that, 2,350 miles from Iran. And what is known is that neither the UK Defense Ministry nor the US military have stated this happened nor confirmed media reports. And the report that it occurred was nicely timed for a UK decision to expand its military cooperation with the U.S. against Iran. Well, how far is London from Iran? So this last Friday evening, a few hours before the UK ministers were to assemble in London to agree to the use of their military bases by the U.S. to attack Iran, the Wall Street Journal and CNN issued reports citing, quote, unnamed U.S. officials that 2 ballistic missiles were fired at Diego Garcia, with one failing and the other being intercepted by a U.S. warship. The BBC understands the reports are accurate. BBC understands the missiles were fired by Iran sometime during the period late on Thursday night into Friday morning. Al Jazeera provided some needed context for the reports of Iran's sudden new military capability. A lecturer at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies told Al Jazeera, these missiles to Diego Garcia mean Iran has 4,000 kilometer plus ballistic missiles that has not been revealed before. If you reverse the direction of these missiles, they could reach London. So that changes the calculus, not only for the U.S. and its justification for the war, but also for a reluctant London and European Union to join the war. I think that's very, very interesting. Now, troops on the ground. That's going to have to wait till tomorrow. I got some good information supporting troops on the ground and against troops on the ground, but we're kind of running out of time. I want to mention my 1/2 off special. I got a couple of openings this week. If you're in pain, I can take care of you this week. This was a special we were running back in December as our normal annual Christmas special. As I said, there's just been so much demand, and I can't turn these people down. There's been so much demand for it. Call 801-523-1890. 801-523-1890. Schedule an appointment. There's no charge for the consultation. We'll sit there and talk, and you want me to take care of you, I will. If you don't want me to take care of you, we'll still be friends. But that 1/2 off special saves several $100s. All right, that's it for today at K-Talk. I'll see you all tomorrow. And for those on the stream, thanks for your participation. If you can help get the word out, like and subscribe, share this with other people you think might be benefited by it. I would greatly appreciate that. So you keep your wits about you. I'll be back with you all tomorrow. Don't go losing your minds over this. This could turn out good before